Video editing is an inspiring and rewarding creative pursuit, but it can be utterly frustrating when you're starting out. But don't worry, if you're feeling lost, then I've got you covered. I'm Tom Graham for Envato. I've been editing in Premiere Pro since I was like 14 years old. I fumbled through learning the program before YouTube even existed, back when you had to read a manual, and I want to help you skip that phase. Premiere Pro is probably one of the industry standard video editing softwares right now, but the learning curve for a beginner can feel very, very steep. So in this beginner's quick start guide for Premiere Pro, I'm going to take you from a completely blank slate to being able to confidently navigate the program and create professional edits that feel modern and fresh. It's going to be a rapid fire overview to get you up to speed with the program, and then we'll ease into some of the more creative and technical aspects that go into crafting an edit. Now, right now you probably have a couple of questions, at least two. Why is he patting a chihuahua? And what project are we going to be working on in this tutorial to learn Premiere Pro together? Well, lucky for you, those questions are about to be answered. There's a lot to get through, so let's jump into Premiere Pro. This is Premiere Pro for beginners. Let's make you a video editor. How about it, honey? Yep. Now, for those who are just here for the rapid fire overview of Premiere Pro, let's just take a flying visit of the program, the layout, the various different sections, and basically all of the bits you need to know just to navigate the program. Then we'll slow it down a bit, take our time, and look at how to go about creating an edit in the program with a real world project that I'm working on, and maybe, just maybe, the chihuahua will start to make sense. All right, it's rapid fire Premiere Pro time. This is Premiere Pro, and I'm working in the 2025 version of the program. Your layout might be slightly different if you're working in a different version of the program, like 2024 or 3 or anything like that. But 99% of this rapid fire overview, as well as the larger course, will be relevant across at least the last few years of Premiere Pro. I'm going to skip opening the program and setting up a project. We'll cover importing footage, creating bins, and generating sequences in great detail in about 10 minutes time. So workspaces are a big thing in Premiere Pro. There's plenty of them as well, not to mention the custom ones that you can create yourself. To access your list of pre-built workspaces, you can click this button up here. If you want them all listed out in the Workspaces toolbar, you can select Show Workspaces tabs, or if you want to show just the one you're working on, click Show Workspaces label. Or you can choose to just show this button, in which case click the Show Workspaces label a second time and they'll all disappear. You can also edit which workspaces you see in those tabs down in the Edit Workspaces button. Just drag and drop to reorder to your heart's content. You can move and resize a lot of these panels like so, but if you ever want to reset them to their default, you can do so by going to Window, Menu, and selecting Workspace Reset to save layout. The main workspaces we'll be looking at in the larger course shortly are Assembly, Editing, Captions and Graphics, as well as Color. Let's throw it into editing mode right now and look at some of the video tools available to you. These are just the critical daily drivers that you need to perform edits with, the mainstays of your time in this program. So what you're seeing here is your program monitor in the middle. This is showing you the footage you're editing. On the left, we have a few panels, the important ones being Source Monitor and the Effects Controls panel. Right now, there's nothing in the Source Monitor, but if I select a clip down here in the Project panel, it will show up. This is a view of the media selected in your project panel and not something that you've actually committed to your edit. It's more of a staging area. You can use the Source Monitor to preview clips and find parts of the clips that you want to bring into your edit before you commit them to your sequence. So that explains that down here is your project panel, which is basically where all of your files live. In this section, you also have a few other tabs, and the most important of those, in my opinion, is Effects. Important in terms of your daily use. But that's hidden over here, so let's click it, drag it, and reorder it so it's more accessible. By default, it's sort of hidden. Next to that, we have our Tools panel. Then next to that, we have our sequence window. You'll see we have a few clips in there already, both audio and video, and that's what's committed to our edit. That's what our program monitor above is displaying. We then have our properties panel in the top right. Below our program monitor, we also have some quick buttons for doing various bits and pieces, and we'll get into those in more detail later in the course. The last two buttons I want to show you before we get to the edit tools are the magnet icon, which is our snapping tool, or S on our keyboard. This makes things snap to each other when we're moving them around our sequence. Leave this on 90% of the time and turn it off if you want some finer control, especially when editing music or dialogue. Next to that, we have the link selection button. With that one on, it means that clips that have linked audio and video or other clips that you've linked together will move with each other even if you just click one of them. For instance, if you click and drag the video, the audio that is linked will move with it. With it unchecked, you can move those linked clips individually, but beware, sometimes you'll get things out of sync. This video is brought to you by Envato, the unlimited creative subscription. The broadest range of categories, everything that you need to make great videos. Follow the link in the description and start creating now. Alright, so let's start to move some things around our sequence. This button here, or V on your keyboard, is the selection tool. Now get used to clicking this, or better still, get used to using the keyboard shortcut, as this is what you'll use to select clips on your timeline as well as to interact with most of the functionality of the app. It's essentially your mouse or your cursor. Select individual clips with a click, select multiple with a click and drag to cover the ones you want to select, and then move them with a click and drag along the sequence. You can also use the selection tool to move your playhead, which is this thing here, which basically denotes what part of your clips that you're seeing up in the program monitor. A single click anywhere in this little timeline will put your playhead atop those clips and show it in the program monitor. A click and drag will let you scrub along your timeline. For finer control, you can zoom in on your sequence with plus and minus keys on your keyboard, or if you have a scrolly mouse, hold Option and scroll in and out on your scrolly wheel. For even finer adjustments, the left and right keys on the keyboard will move a frame in either direction. Holding Shift and hitting those keys will give you a 5-frame jump. Now spacebar will play and pause your footage. If you hit L on your keyboard, it will speed up your playback in the forward direction, and J on your keyboard will play back in reverse. If you hit J or L multiple times, it will increase the speed in either forward or reverse, depending on which one you're clicking. If you do have some trouble playing back your footage smoothly in your program monitor, you could look to drop the playback resolution. So at the moment I have it set to full. You can drop that to half or a quarter, or even down to an 1/8 or 1/16, depending on how big your footage is. For us, we can drop this down to a quarter here, and you'll see while it's paused, you still get the full resolution image. But when I hit spacebar to play through, you'll see that it drops down to a quarter resolution, but it is playing through nice and smoothly. When I hit spacebar again, it automatically shows us the full resolution. If you do want to change that, you can hit the settings here for your program monitor and go to paused resolution, and you can decide if you want that to be full, half, or 1/4. This tool down here is the razor tool, and it's also C on your keyboard by default. It allows for edits to be made to the clips. Click on a clip with the tool selected and it makes a cut, splitting the clip in two. You can then delete the part of the clip that you don't want or move it elsewhere on your timeline. If you cut the clip and then delete it but don't move the other clips, it will create a gap called a ripple. To delete this ripple, select it by clicking the blank space in between two clips and right-click Ripple Delete, or simply hit the backspace key. Alternatively, if you have an edit made, like so, and you want to delete this middle clip and close the gap, you can select the middle clip, hold Option on your keyboard, and hit backspace to delete the clip and close the gap in one motion. Now the text tool is also a handy one in this section. Selecting the tool and clicking in the program monitor will create a text box that you can input your text in and then create titles and such. You'll see it also creates a text layer on our sequence. We'll get to text and titles in a little more detail in a moment. Now, if you're not already aware, Premiere Pro is layer-based, so anything that appears on top in the video layers will take priority to that below. Also note that video and audio sections are split here on the sequence, so anything above this line is video and anything below this line is audio. You can see here we've got V1, V2, V3, that's our video tracks, and we've got A1, A2, A3, and so on. They're our audio tracks. This layer thing that I'm talking about now is specifically referring to video clips and tracks. So if I move this clip above this one, you'll see that when I play them both back, the top one is actually the one that is showing in the frame, in the program monitor. If I was to make the top one smaller, you'll see that both are in fact playing at the same time. And that's a great segue to move on to transform controls for your clips. With a clip selected, you can access a range of handy tools up in the Effects Controls panel. You'll probably use position, scale, opacity, and crop tools the most, but obviously that all depends on what you're working on. So for instance, let me grab this top clip and make it smaller to demonstrate the layer hierarchy. You can either click this little number here and drag it up and down to change the parameter, or you can click in and type the specific number if you want to get nice and precise about it. You'll notice all of these tools have a little stopwatch icon next to them as well. These enable our keyframes for which we use to create basic animations. Anything with this icon next to it can be keyframed. Let's just create a very simple scale up animation to demonstrate this. With our target clip selected, we'll use this playhead up here in the Effects Controls panel to make sure that we're at the very start of our clip. We'll change our scale parameter to 50 and click the stopwatch. You can see that a keyframe has been added in here. We'll then go forward in time to wherever you want this animation to happen, and then we'll increase our scale to 100, creating another keyframe. Now when we play that clip back, we'll see it scales over time from 50 to 100%. By default, we create linear keyframes, which means that the move happens at a set speed and velocity over time. If you drop the little caret down next to the scale, you can see that the line is straight between 50 and 100. However, if we want our animation to be a little more dynamic, we can create eased keyframes, and a quick and easy way to do this is select these keyframes, right-click and select Ease In. Now you can see we have a curve. Playing that back, we can see the animation is a little more dynamic. Now with keyframe animation, the basic rule is that the steeper the curve, the faster the movement, the shallower the curve, the slower the movement. And we can demonstrate this by grabbing the handle of this last keyframe, dragging it out and making the start of the movement much steeper, which in turn makes the move happen really quickly at the beginning and then much slower towards the end. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering where I got this footage, or if you're in need of content like this for your projects, or maybe you just need footage like this to practice your editing skills that you're learning in this video on, then head to Envato. There's millions of assets across a broad range of categories perfect for video creators, and we're talking something like 6 million stock videos as well. It's wild. So more on Envato a little later on and how it can fit into your workflow. For now, let's continue learning about Premiere Pro. Okay, moving on to our audio tools. We'll stay in the edit workspace, but to really get down to the nitty-gritty, you can always switch over to the audio workspace. The general everyday use tools available in the edit section for audio are the audio gain or the loudness of the clip, and you can change this easily in a couple of ways. The first way is to click and drag this little white line in the audio. You can also right click and select audio gain for some other controls. You can select all of your tracks, right click, go to gain and make adjustments to multiple clips at once. And if you want to mute and solo your tracks for any reason, you can do so down here. Text and graphics is pretty straightforward in Premiere Pro if you've used any text design tools before. You use the text type tool, or T, on your keyboard to create the text layer. Once you have your text in there with the layer selected, you'll then have a bunch of parameters that you can change up in the Effects Controls panel. You can drop the little caret down next to text to find them. You can also see that with the text layer selected, it also pops a little box up in the Properties panel. If you select that, you get the same tools that we just twirled down in the Effects Controls panel, exactly the same thing, just a different place. And you'll see if you change parameters in the Effects Controls panel, for instance, those parameter changes will show up in the Properties panel. Another task that you might want to complete on a day-to-day basis when editing is increasing or decreasing the speed of your clip. If you select your video clip you want to change, you can right-click and go to Speed, Duration, to make changes to either the specific duration or to the speed. You can reverse your clip, as well as maintain the audio pitch, unless, for instance, you want the high-pitched, sped-up vibe. If you are slowing down a clip, please note that your mileage may vary, as to have a smooth slow motion playback, you need many more frames than your sequence is set to in your source media. For example, if you're working on a 25 frames per second sequence and want to slow down a 25 frames per second clip by half, it will be steppy and stuttery. But if you try to slow down a 50 frames per second clip by half, it will be smooth. In any case, this is where you can make some of those speed adjustment changes. Now, adding effects and transitions to your clips is really simple as well. And remember, we moved our effects panel over here for ease. It's basically a drag and drop situation. So find an effect that you want. Let's say we need to add a blur to this clip to make the text stand out above. We can go into effects and search for a blur, or twirl down our video effects and find the one that we want. We'll drag this Gaussian blur onto our clip, and the controls for that will appear in our effects controls panel. Let's increase it to, say, 20. There's plenty of great effects and transitions for both audio and video clips in the effects bin that is built into Premiere. For transitions, all you need to do is make sure that you're dragging the transition effect between two clips that you want to transition. For instance, a cross dissolve between these two clips. Stepping out of our editing workspace and into the color panel, we can now do some basic color grading. We'll take a much deeper look at this in the main part of the tutorial, but here is where you can make corrections to your footage and produce creative grades using the Lumetri color panel. And finally, exporting. Once you're happy with your masterpiece, I want to make sure you're heading back into your editing page. Bring your playhead to the beginning of your sequence and hit I on your keyboard to set an in point. Then I want you to go to the end of your sequence and hit O on your keyboard to set an out point. You'll see that this section is then highlighted. This is going to help us tell the renderer what parts of the video you want to export. If you only want a certain part of your sequence exported, then you can shift your in and out points to fit. Now click on the Export tab up here. The quick overview here is just use presets, and if you're going to upload to the web, select a high quality H.264 preset that matches your sequence settings, or a ProRes preset if it's a master copy that you're exporting for safekeeping. Set your file name, select your destination, and hit render. No need at this point to send it to Media Encoder. And that, my friends, is the flying overview of all of the crucial tools and workspaces that you need to know for day-to-day editing tasks in Premiere Pro. Now, if that was all that you needed to get started, then thanks for stopping by, go forward, smash out that edit. But if you do want to dive deeper and look at all of those tools and heaps more in action as I create a real edit, then stick around, there's going to be plenty here for everybody. On that note, let's dive in from scratch. First up, I want to show you how I set up my hard drive for a project, and then we'll go into Premiere Pro and I'll show you exactly how I set up that project from scratch in the program. So this is the hard drive I'll be working on in this project, or rather SSD. You can see that I have it all laid out with this folder structure, which I'll start to explain shortly. But all we have in here for now is the rushes from our shoot, which in this case was a how-to guide for a dog photography studio, and now the Chihuahua makes sense. But importantly, you can see that we have no project files from Premiere Pro. We're going to be building this from scratch. Okay, so file structure. This is by no means the only way to do it, but this is kind of the way that I do it. And this is something that has sort of evolved over time as I've worked in different agencies with different editors and things like that. But the basics of what I'm trying to convey here is that organization is pretty important, and you need to know where everything is in order to keep things tidy. So if you start from organizing your hard drive, then your edits will be tidy as well. If you do nothing else, I just want you to have a separate folder for your rushes and your assets, and then a separate folder for your working files in Premiere Pro. I like a numbered setup as it sort of reflects the flow of a project, but you can do whatever you want. In pre-production, I'll have anything that I've been working on prior to the video shoot, and this might be the scripts, visual references, color palettes, etc. We've got nothing in this one. This was just a conversation that I had with the client prior to shooting. We had a bit of an idea of what we wanted, going back and forward in some emails, and then we just turned up on the day and got it shot. In rushes and assets, I'll have my video files from the shoot, and you can see here I had some stuff shot on the Sony FX30, and then I had one single shot here from the DJI Osmo, just to kind of get a static shot that we can cut to if we need. In edit, I'll have my working files, so this is where I'll save my Premiere Pro working files as I go, and then I'll have exports here. So if I'm exporting out of Premiere Pro, this is where my exports will live. Now I do have sourced assets here specifically for my edit, and if I'm doing something that is going to be heavy on the edit and also heavy on the motion in terms of working, in my case, in After Effects, I'll put my sourced assets like music and other photos and things like that in the edit sourced assets, and then if I'm doing heavy motion stuff, I'll have my sourced assets for my motion specifically in that folder. But you can see I also have rushes and assets as well, so oftentimes if I only have a few, like a couple of music tracks or some sound effects, I'll just put those files in here. And then motion's pretty much the same, so I'll have my working files for After Effects, any exports out of After Effects, and like I said, sourced assets for that motion work if I need to work that way. Now, one last folder that isn't currently there, but we'll add it in now, is proxies, so we'll put 05 proxies. And I don't often need to work with proxy media, but sometimes if I'm working really chunky files, for instance, sometimes I shoot with red RAW files, which are 5 or 6K, and they can be pretty chunky, so you just want to give your machine the best chance of being able to work with those. Or if you're editing files that are MP4s, like I am here from the FX30, these work pretty well. It's an MP4, it's 4K though, so it's a bit chunky. Like for instance, that one file is 14 gig in an MP4 wrapper. This will all make a lot more sense at the end of this tutorial. If you stick with me, we'll talk more about codecs and things like that. But basically, an MP4 is a delivery codec. Something like ProRes is an editing format codec. So what we can do so that we have the smoothest editing playback possible is we can set up a bunch of proxies, which are smaller, much more manageable copies of our working files. And in this case, we'll transcode them into an editing format or an editing codec like ProRes. And that way we'll have a nice smooth playback for our entire edit. And then basically once you hit export at the end, everything relinks. So if you have problems working with footage in Premiere Pro, if you're getting stuttery playback and it's just doing your head in, proxy workflow is for you. We'll set the proxies up within Premiere Pro, and I think that's the perfect segue. Let's open up Premiere Pro. When you launch the program, you'll be greeted with this page or a similar one that will show up some recent projects if you've been working on some other edits. Let's click New Project up in the top right. New in the 2025 version of the app, you now get this tiny little dialog box that asks you to set up your project name, location, and if you want to use a template. So pop in your name and destination. Mine will be dogphotog_QA_VO101. And then my location will be the edit working files folder on my hard drive. Hit create. You'll see when you do open it up, there is just a bunch of sample media from Adobe stock that you can play with and get up to speed on in terms of practicing the tools and workflows you see in this edit. On the left here, you can see we have our SSDs and hard drives mounted. So let's navigate to the rushes folder we saw earlier in my Finder.
I'm only going to select these files now as they're my piece to camera files, and I'll show you a different way of importing footage in the next section, and we'll bring our B-roll in then. Over on the right, we have some options to help kick your project off in a nice and tidy way right from the start. You can add your media that you're importing to a new bin, which is what Premiere Pro calls a folder. So let's do that, and we'll call it rushes. The next option is to copy media. This is only relevant though if you're importing files directly from the camera's recording media. For instance, if you're a DIT on set and you're using Premiere Pro to not only import your footage directly from the card, but also creating a backup to another folder. For our purposes though, this is not relevant as we already have the media stored away on our editing drive. Next setting down is to create a new sequence, and we'll go ahead and do that here. A sequence is essentially your edit over time. It's where you build your edit. As you start to work on projects of more scope, you could have multiple sequences making up an edit. For instance, if you're working on a narrative film, you could have a sequence for each scene, and then a master sequence making up your overall edit. For this project, we're going to name this sequence our project name plus selects, and I'll explain that a little further in the next chapter. Then finally, you have automatic transcription, and in the past I would have said to skip over this section, but let's go ahead and turn this on. Select the separate speakers toggle here if you do have multiple people speaking on camera, and select if you want all clips or just the sequence to be transcribed. Let's just do just sequence as it's just our piece to camera footage for now. So the reason I want to do this is because text-based editing has come to Premiere recently, and it's actually wildly useful for talking heads-based projects like this. Now we're over in the top level editing section. You can see that up in the top left here, it's easy as to switch between import, edit, and export as well. Over in this top toolbar, I want you to make sure you're in assembly. Over on the left here, you have the project panel, and this is effectively your file browser, and it will start to reflect the hard drive that you're working on if you're keeping things nice and tidy, which I know you will be. You can see the bin that we created with our rushes in it, and you can see the sequence we created in this panel has also opened up in the timeline panel here. Before we move into making our selects though, let's quickly look at the other ways you can import media into your project in case you 1. Don't need to do it all at the start, or 2. Collect media as you go like I do. I'm jumping back and forth between my project and Envato, grabbing music, sound effects, and various bits of stock footage as I go generally. So you can either right click in the project panel, select import, and select your files, or even easier still, you can just drag and drop directly from your Finder into your project bin like so. Pick whichever way is easy for you. You can also right click here to create new bins, or click this little button down below, and let's create a couple here that we'll know we'll be using for this project. Let's also create a master sequence while we're at it, and we'll build our edit in there once we've made our selects. Right click and select new item sequence and pick a preset that works for you. I suggest one of the HD 1080p or 4K presets. I'll select the 1080p at 25 frames per second. If you do want to change any specific settings, you can do so up here in settings, but for now, just keep it locked to the preset for ease. Name your sequence below and hit OK. Now earlier I talked about proxy workflows, so let me run through how to set that up briefly. You go to File, Project Settings, Ingest Settings, and set the action to create proxies. Your frame size can select whatever you want. I like half, or we can even do quarter. In preset, this is where you can select what the file type you want is. We've talked about the difference between H.264 and ProRes, so let's go ahead and select the ProRes proxy file here. And I like to keep the proxy watermark on to make 100% sure that I know that I'm looking at the proxy versus the original while I'm working, just so that I can double check as I'm going if I'm starting to lag or things like that. And then we can just double check as well once we've exported that no proxies have accidentally snuck their way out into the edit. Now when you import your footage, what's going to happen is that Media Encoder will open up in the background and import both the proxy and original file into your project. For the sake of showing you this, I'm going to delete our current rushes folder and show you that process, but if you already have footage here in Premiere Pro like we do, you could just right click on those files and go down to proxy and then create proxies, and it will give you the same dialog box to set your proxy settings, and then you can just do those individually if you need. Okay, so I've deleted all those. I'm going to right click, hit import, select my folder of rushes, and I can see that Media Encoder has opened up in the background and is starting the proxy process. We'll give it a minute to do its thing and then we'll come back. So now if I drag this footage over into our sequence, you can see the little proxy icon is showing up here. To toggle the proxy file on and off, you can click this little button underneath the program monitor. And if you don't see this little button, you can click the plus button here and drag that little toggle proxies button down into your toolbar. Now you can toggle the proxies on and off as needed, and your timeline should play back buttery smooth. So now we have it all set up with our hard drive and our project, let's jump into actually creating this edit. First up, we need to make selects. So the way I generally like to go about this part is just to lay everything out on the page, so to speak. And by that, I just like to throw most, if not all, of my rushes onto the timeline and then start sifting through it from there. That's the logical way my brain likes to work, but it's not for everyone, of course. And I am just talking about shorter projects like this. If we're talking narrative films or anything that's way more in depth, like a music video or something like that, I probably would go about this in a little bit of a different fashion. The other more traditional way to do this, and the way that Premiere sort of lays it out for you, is to audition your clips in the source monitor, like so. And you can set your in and out points for the parts of the video that you want to then bring it down into your sequence and then build your selects out from there. That is totally fine and valid. It's just not my way, to be honest. The good thing though is there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to go about it, so do what works for you. We'll talk about using 4K footage on a 1080p timeline very shortly, but you'll notice as I've dropped this in using this workflow that it's quite punched in here because we're dropping a 4K piece of footage on a 1080p timeline. A really easy way to rectify this is right click and go to scale to frame size. My way has the benefit of being able to get a really good top level view of the project and everything that you're working with. So the way I'd approach this edit, something with a piece to camera, a bit of dialogue, and then some B-roll, is to focus on cutting our story together first. There's not much point in working on the B-roll before you have that story. I'm going to focus just on the audio pieces for now, and then we'll craft our story, then we'll bring our B-roll back in. And I'm just going to delineate between Dan and Heather's footage. A really easy way to do that is to change the color of these clips, and you can do that by selecting a clip that you want to change, and you can select multiple if you want. Then you right click on it and you go to label, and then you change whatever color you want to change to. So now we've got different colored clips for Dan and for Heather. Also, another great first step that I would encourage, but for obvious reasons is way too time consuming for a tutorial, is to make sure that you sit through and play everything before you start this process. You need to know the content in full before you can craft a story. Now, if you're the one who has directed and shot this footage, you've probably got a pretty good handle on it, but it still does pay to watch it all through before you start cutting it up again. If you're simply the editor and didn't work on the project at all, in the sense that you were involved in production or on set or anything like that, then definitely sit there and watch all of your rushes before you start making selects. Now, with an audio-based edit like this, you can go two ways. You can go old school or new school, and I'll show you both. Let's start with new school. I mentioned earlier that text-based editing exists now, and because we clicked those buttons on import, our audio clips here have automatically been transcribed and are waiting for us over in the text-based editing workspace. So over here on the left, if you're in the text transcript area, you can click anywhere in the transcript and your playhead will jump to that point in the sequence. It's super handy. Not only can you jump around visually, but you can also highlight sections of the text, and let's just say you want to remove something, you can delete that from the transcript and boom, deleted from your sequence. So now you can just start to get an idea of how easy it is to go through and quickly make your selects based on the text. If you know your content, which I know you will because you'll have sat and watched it like I just suggested, it's really easy to see in the transcript which are the parts that the interviewee is responding and that you probably want to keep, and which are the parts where they're not and you're just sort of talking. So why not just go through and delete all the parts that are obviously not relevant? There, done. Now you can see that on my sequence I'm left with only the parts that is Dan reading from the script. We've still got multiple takes of each read, but we've sifted through and ridded ourselves of the fluff. So that's the new school. What's the old school? The old school is reading the waveforms. I'll demonstrate this on Heather's piece to camera. You can see here if I drag the audio clip down, it makes the waveforms really easy to see. And because this is just one person mic'd up speaking to camera here, we can deduce that the concentration of the peaks on the waveform are where Heather is reading the script, and the lulls and troughs in the waves are the parts that just aren't relevant, or where we might be discussing the next part. Similar to what we just saw with the text-based editing. So I like to go along and make cuts with my razor tool in the parts that are obviously not responses, and of course I will just give them a quick listen as I go to make sure. Then I'll delete those bits and be left with just the relevant responses to camera. A quick way to do this using keyboard shortcuts is to map a key to a function called an add edit. And you can do this by going to the Premiere Pro menu up here, going to keyboard shortcuts, searching for add edit in this section and assigning it to a key. You'll see I have it set to the H key. Now back in my sequence, if I click somewhere in the empty part above our clips, not actually on a clip, and I hit H, it'll make an edit all the way down through any track that is targeted, which is what these blue highlights over here mean, and importantly not locked, which is what these little lock icons mean. This works well if you have multiple layers of video stacked on top of each other. It will cut through everything in your video and audio tracks, as long as they're targeted and not locked, like I just said. 90% of my workflow when making selects is in this fashion. spacebar to play, listen to the part I want to keep, spacebar at the start of where I want to make the cut, H on my keyboard to add the edit, double tap L to play forward in double speed, spacebar again when I think the next usable moment is about to start, H on the keyboard to add another edit, which then will highlight that freshly made clip, to which you can then hit Option and backspace to delete and close the clip. Now do that a couple of hundred times and you have yourself a sequence of selects. That might just sound a little bit confusing hearing it, but once you get that muscle memory in, you can start to edit really quickly without a mouse at all. So pick new school, old school, or a combo of both and see what fits for you. I learnt and have been doing that old school method for 10, 15 years. So even though the text-based editing is really good, I actually find it faster just to stick with my old school methods. But I'm just the messenger. By no means do you have to do what I do. Okay, so now I have a sequence with the selects from both Dan and Heather's piece to camera. My job is to now go through each of them and decide which is the best take. Some takes might be better than others for performance alone, or you might be looking out for things like audio or lighting glitches, or where the lighting maybe mismatches between two clips if, say, the sun has come out during a take. Some will just vibe with you better than others. Right now it's time to get that human brain to work and make some choices. I like to just move my favorite ones up into the V2 track so that once I've got them all picked out, I can easily highlight them and then copy and paste them over into our edit sequence, which is what I'm going to do now. Importantly, I copy them out of our select sequence rather than cutting and pasting them. That way, if I ever need to go back and refer to my select sequence, I can really easily find the clips that I want. All right, so let's move over into our edit sequence. So as you can see, when I pull this over into the edit sequence, I have a bunch of gaps or ripples. If you highlight all of these clips, you can go up into sequence and then go down to close gap, and it will close all of those gaps up together. Just a handy little tip. Now, if you are interested in seeing my thought process play out in a step-by-step fashion when it comes to making creative decisions in an edit, then you should definitely check out my Beginner's Guide to Video Editing course. In that, I take a really methodical and step-by-step approach to crafting a similar piece of work to this project, and I explain my thought process pretty much with every cut. So if you really want to get into the weeds, check that video out next. For this quicker guide though, we're going to skip my creative musings. So I've pulled all of those best takes into my edit sequence and I've arranged them in the order that works best for me. You can see that I've cut back and forward between Dan and Heather, and I've left some placeholder gaps here for titles. I'll have the questions that they're answering appear as little animated cards throughout, and more on that shortly. I've also employed the punch-in technique on a number of shots where we had some jump cuts. Now, jump cuts, if you're not 100% across them, is where a section of your footage has been removed for whatever reason, and we see a visible jump in the position of our subject when the two clips combine. It's much more pronounced when the camera is locked off on a tripod, such as it is in this shot. A jump cut is not inherently a bad thing. Sometimes people like to use them. I like to use them every now and again. However, it's not always desirable. So one way to get around that is by punching in on your footage. You can do this when you have, for instance, a 4K video and you're editing and delivering in a 1080p sequence. You effectively then can zoom in on your footage by 50% without any discernible quality loss. So I want to polish this edit up a little bit so it doesn't feel like a bunch of rushes slammed together. And the thing that I think really makes the jump from rushes to a more kind of coherent edit is adding music. You can import your files the exact same way we did earlier with our rushes if you've got your music, say from Envato, on a hard drive somewhere. However, there is a really great new way to go about this with the Envato extension for Premiere Pro. It's available in the Adobe Creative Cloud app, and you can just search for Envato in the app section. To launch it in Premiere, go to Window Extension Envato. With the extension open, you can enable AI-assisted search, which will help find relevant music, sound effects, and stock footage based on the current frame in your program monitor, which is super handy for B-roll. Or you can use a traditional search, which is what we're going to do for some music here. You can either download a preview of the files, or if you have your Envato account connected, you can download and license the full file right from the app. So on top of the AI-assisted search, let's also pop in a couple of search terms for music that we think might fit our video. I'm going to look for some jazzy hip-hop type beat, as this is a pretty energetic brand when it comes to all of the dogs and things like that. And I don't want to stray, no pun intended, down a comical or childish path with a music choice. So I want energy, but without having that kind of like, naff vibe. So having a look at these, I'm going to go with this one here. It has that kind of 90s sample-based thing going on, feels nice and upbeat without being too distracting. Let's pull that down into our edit. I'm also going to drop the gain down to something around negative 25 decibels. I generally find that this is a good starting point for a music bed. Then you can mix the dialogue track to sit nicely over the top. To dive deeper into your audio mixing and effects, you can go to the audio workspace. However, there are some simple tools that we can use within the edit workspace when we're getting everything into one place. Go to Window and make sure your Essential Sound tab is selected. We're going to add a ducker to the music here so that it sits a little friendlier behind our dialogue. So with the music track highlighted, I want you to tag it as music in the Essential Sounds panel and turn everything off except ducking. In that section, you can tweak the settings to fit the music track you're working with alongside your dialogue. Right now, I'm pretty happy with this dialogue. I might do a little bit more cleaning up before I export, but let's say you had a slightly noisy location and you wanted to do some cleaning up of the background noise. You can do a similar thing here in the Essential Sounds tab by selecting your clips, tagging them as dialogue if they haven't already been, and then turning on the reduced noise slider in the repair menu. Another quick and super handy audio tool available to you in the edit workspace is the remix tool. See here how my music track is a little too long for my video? Well, with the music remixer tool, you can shorten it, and through some background computational wizardry, the program will make beat-specific cuts to shorten the track to the right length. And it gets pretty close every time. It does a really good job at hiding the cuts too. Let's have a look at this little cut here, for example. That said, I might want a little wiggle room in this video, so whilst I'm still working on it, I'm going to keep the track at its original length, and I can always come back and use this remix tool if I do need to shorten it down. Up to this point, we've been looking at the video footage in a pretty basic fashion when it comes to color. Some of the keen-eyed amongst you might have noticed that when I was previewing the footage in the source monitor, it was displaying in its original log format, that washed out, no color, gray look. And then once I pulled it over into our sequence, it magically had some color on it. Now this is a brand new feature in the 2025 version of Premiere Pro. There's a little button that you can check in your color settings that turns on automatic color management and brings your log and raw footage into your export color space automatically. In this case, Rec 709. Now I assume some of you might have no idea what I'm saying, so let me try to one-line it. Log or logarithmic footage, in the most basic way, contains quote-unquote no color, but heaps of data. Data that can be manipulated in color grading to bring color to the footage with much more precision and power than would be possible by simply capturing it in camera with the color applied. Much like we discussed earlier when we said that MP4 files were delivery files and ProRes files are designed for editing, it's similar with log color spaces or a delivery color space. So Rec 709 is a standard delivery color space, and what we're doing when we color grade is taking that log footage, applying our changes, and then exporting it in Rec 709. So this automatic color management is doing a lot of that for us at a base level now when you import your footage. Another thing that's a little bit nuanced and might go over the heads of some beginners is that there is color grading and also color correction. So going from log to Rec 709 is technically correcting for the color space. And then we do our grade, which is the creative layer that goes over the top. What I'm getting at is that so far in this video, you've seen Premiere doing the first correction step for us automatically. But now it's time for us to go in, tweak that to our liking, and perform a basic color grade over the top to our footage. So enough with the technical mumbo jumbo, let's just get into the color workspace and see it in action. So up here in our Lumetri color tab is where all of our color correction and grading is going to take place in Premiere. Let's first take a look at the settings. Under the project settings drop-down, you'll see that the auto detect log video color space is selected by default. Let's toggle this off and on and you'll see the difference that I was talking about. You've got this gray looking log footage which is coming directly from the camera with no color processing. And then when I toggle the auto detect back on, it's conforming that log footage, which in this case is S-Log3 with the S-Gamma3 Cine Gamma applied, to a Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 color space, which is the delivery color space that we've determined that we're working in. Now, if you don't know what color space you're delivering for, 99% of the time it's going to be Rec 709, unless you're working on a specific project that has specific color space needs, in which case my assumption is that you'll know those needs. If in doubt, Rec 709. Cool, let's go back to the edit section in Lumetri where we can tweak the correction and then the creative grade. I'm going to just double check the color balance as there was a little bit of mixed lighting on the day, true daylight coming through the window and then a 5600K daylight coming from a lamp. Now you can do that with this little eyedropper tool here, and when you click on the widest part of your image, it will do its thing. So you can see here, not much of a correction is needed. I nailed it on the day, go me. In this correction phase as well, I do often like to just see what this auto function does in Premiere Pro. So let's click it and see how we go. It is a little bit hit and miss and I don't always use it, but you know what? In this case, it's not too bad. I think we can leave it and work from there. That's a good base starting point for my footage in terms of correcting it from its camera log state to a presentable image. So let's give it a quick creative grade now. Opening up the creative section down here, you can see I have the ability to import a creative look or a LUT, and that's a great opportunity here to try out some of the great LUTs on offer on Envato. Now, Dog for Dog have a colourful, often pastel aesthetic, and I wanted to bring some of that life, so I found a retro film look on Envato. Oftentimes, these are going to be listed as Lightroom presets, so if you do see those as Lightroom presets, they more than likely will come packaged with LUT files as well, .cube files, which are the LUTs that we work with in colour grading. So if you are exploring Envato for some LUTs, that's where they might be hidden. So let's bring one of those into our creative section here. I'm going to grab this Palm Springs number 4 look and apply that. Now, the good thing about the creative section here in Lumetri is that we can adjust the intensity of our look. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit so that it looks a little bit more natural, and I'm going to play with the vibrant slider down here to bring a little bit more punch to the colored background as well as the couch. Rather than just doing a linear increase of the saturation, I like the vibrant slider as it sort of targets and increases or decreases different colors in a non-kind of standard way. I'll also go down here into my color wheels and I'll adjust the luminance levels of my shadows, midtones, and highlights as a way to introduce some contrast in the image. You can also do this by creating a basic contrast curve in the curve section as well. If you've done some photo manipulation before, this might be more comfortable to you. I'm also going to create a slight vignette on the image just to really draw our attention in on our subjects. And you can always toggle each section on and off to check your work, and you can toggle the whole grade on and off globally with this little FX button up here. So that's corrected and graded just the one clip on our timeline that we were selecting. But if we want to apply that to all of our footage, it's really easy to do so. You can either right click on the corrected clip and select copy or hit Command C, and then right click on the clip that you want to paste the grade to, or multiple clips if you've selected multiple, and you can select paste attributes. And you've got to make sure that Lumetri color is selected in your effects that you want to copy and paste. Super simple. If you are copying the grade from one clip over to multiple clips, you'll of course need to go back through each clip and make any individual tweaks that will account for things like lighting changes and so on. So I'm just going to do that very quickly now. Alright, so now we have our music and our basic color grade going. I think we need some titles on here, and then we're kind of approaching done. Now I have made this little intro animation for this project featuring some of the dogs of Dog for Dog, which I'm going to drop in now, but let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see a tutorial on how I created this. I put this together in After Effects. And this is kind of indicative of how you would work sometimes. You are often supplied with animations and bits and pieces that you do need to drop into your edit, and then you need to go ahead and make things within Premiere Pro that sort of match that. So I'll show you that process now. So with that dropped in at the head, I'm going to make some super basic title cards directly in Premiere Pro where Heather and Dan answer the various questions. And I want to do my best to keep that same flavor of the opening animation in these titles without having to go back to After Effects. So first up, I'm going to create a space for my titles to sit on, and the easiest way to do this is to right-click down here in your media browser, select New Item, and then Color Matte. This will then pop a dialog box and you can pick your specs. For us, the default works. Click OK, and then you'll be able to select a color. Now, I had a little color palette that I was working on for the intro, so I'm going to make my background color this very, very pale pink. That's the hex code FFEBE1. You can name it, and I suggest you call it something like title background just to keep things nice and neat. And now you can drag that color matte to the first clip where we want the title to appear, and for us that's the first clip of Heather when she asks the question, what is Dog for Dog? Now with our text type tool selected, we can click into our program monitor and make that title. I'm going to set the font here to Crimson Text in semi-bold to match our opening title animation, and I'll set the font fill to hex code 3C5091, which is that blue color that we saw in the opener. I'll play with the scale and the initial position, and there we go, we have a title card, but it's pretty boring, hey? So to make this slightly more interesting, let's add some basic animation, and we can do that here in Premiere Pro. I'm going to have that text slightly pop into place with a little bit of easing, and I'll do that by setting my final position and making a keyframe at the time I want it to land, and then I'll go back to the start of the clip and pull the position down slightly. I'll highlight both keyframes and right click, then I'll select Temporal Interpolation and Ease Out. Then I'm going to grab the handle of this keyframe and slide it to create a ramp at the end of the movement so it starts slow and then pops up into place nice and fast. So that looks pretty good, but we can go further with some basic tools. I think I want the words to pop on one by one. There's probably a plugin or effect or something that I can use, but let's get creative with the basic tools that are here, and for this we're going to use the crop function. Setting a keyframe for our crop right at the beginning of this clip, I'll set it to 100%, removing the entire text. I'll then move to the point I want the first word to pop on and create another keyframe at 100%. I'll then move forward one keyframe and drag the crop amount until just the first word is showing, then I'll create another keyframe. I'll then move to the section I want the next word to pop on, create a keyframe, move one frame again, drag the crop amount to reveal the next word, creating another keyframe, and then just repeat this process until all the words have popped on. So that's the text, but it still feels like it's lacking a little something, right? Well, I just so happen to have a big folder of etched doggos. So let's bring some doggos into this. I'll create a new bin and call it dogs. I'll hit Command+I to open up my import box, and then I'll navigate to the folder I have on my hard drive with all of these handsome dogs. I want these to sit slightly behind my text, so on my sequence, I'll bring the layer up one track and then drag my desired dog into place. We'll resize and reposition it to fit, and we'll also give the dog a very similar little animate in. We'll make the position bump into place. So again, creating a keyframe where we want the final position to land, going back to the start of our clip and pulling the position down slightly, creating another keyframe, then selecting those, setting them to ease out and dragging the handles of the final keyframe to match the movement of the text. Playing that back, you can see that with some basic tools in the effects controls panel and some pretty good looking dogs, you can create a really fun little animated title card without leaving Premiere Pro, and the best thing is that it's completely repeatable for the rest of your video. Just swap out your text and the doggos and you're good to go. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through and create the rest of our little titles and we'll get this video wrapped up. There we go, our video is completed and we're totally happy and ready to send it either to our client or our friends or our family for some feedback, or maybe it's 100% finished and we're ready to upload it to the web and share with the world. I want to keep this section simple as it can sometimes have the tendency to be a little bit complicated. So to start with, let's make sure that we're in our edit workspace and we've set our in and out points correctly. To do this, I'm going to go to the front of my sequence and hit I on my keyboard, and then go to the end of my sequence, or where I want the video to finish, and hit O on my keyboard. That has set our in and out points, as you can see here. If we want to adjust it for any reason, we can just hit I and O on our keyboard with our playhead in the desired position, or by dragging the in and out points up here. Now we're ready to go to our export page, which you can do with the Import, Edit, Export menu up the top here. For the sake of this beginner guide, we're going to stick to presets. If you're uploading to the web or just want a manageable copy in terms of file size, we'll export a H.264 MP4 file, and if we're ready to save a master copy for safekeeping or to create smaller web-ready files from that master file down the line, then we'll also export a ProRes copy. So, web-ready first. Input your file name and location up here, and in presets, select the one that best matches your sequence settings. For us, that will be high quality 1080p HD. Amongst other things, the high quality here is referring to the target bitrate, which you can find by toggling the video settings down and then hitting this more button and scrolling down to your bitrate settings. The higher the bitrate, the higher the quality, but the larger the file size will be. As standard, the high quality setting defaults to the variable bitrate, targeting 20 megabits per second and a single render pass. You can change that to VBR2 pass, which is, to put it very simply, where the render will go back and double check its work on a second pass to make sure it hasn't left any crucial data behind. You can also do a constant bitrate for a little bit more consistent quality throughout as well. You also have the option here to crank up your target bitrate with this slider. Remember, the higher the bitrate, the larger the file is going to be. Finally, for this web-ready pass, let's make sure that the format up here is set to H.264. Then down here, just to the right, make sure that the range is set to in and out, which is referencing the in and out points that we set earlier. And then just go over here and hit render. No need to send it over to Media Encoder for this pass. Now that that's done, you can export your master file. In preset, I want you to select Apple ProRes 422 and the format as QuickTime. No need to dial down to any bitrate settings for this master copy. If you're rendering your edit out of Premiere to take into another program where you'll be performing another render, so for instance After Effects for VFX and motion work, or DaVinci Resolve for more in-depth color grading, then render this as a Apple ProRes 4444 file. Same deal with the in and out points, and then hit render. And there you go, you've now completed your first edit in Premiere Pro. So there you go, you now know everything that you needed to know to get up to speed with Premiere Pro, and you should be able to start making edits of your own. And don't forget to check out Envato. We've got the broadest range of creative assets for you to download and use in your projects. All right, until next time, happy editing.